There's a quiet exhaustion that lives behind the eyes of people who hold everything together. It's not the kind that sleep can fix, nor the kind that breaks loudly enough for the world to notice. It's the subtle erosion that happens when you become everyone's stability, even when your own hands are shaking. You learn early that peace is fragile, that if you don't hold the pieces, they fall apart. So you start collecting them, one by one. The fears, the disappointments, the small explosions no one else can handle. And you build a world where your worth is measured by how well you can keep the storm from spilling into other people's lives. On the outside, you look composed, reliable, the one who always knows what to do. But inside, there's a quiet panic, a constant calculation of balance. Every word measured, every emotion delayed, every need postponed until there's space for it, which there never is. You become fluent in pretending that it's fine, pretending that being the strong one is something you chose instead of something you were chosen for. You smile in the right places, comfort the right people, and when it's over, when the door closes, you exhale into a silence that never feels like rest. What no one tells you is that the body keeps score, that your mind learns to mistake tension for safety, that even when the world is calm, your chest still feels like it's waiting for something to collapse. And it's in that waiting, that invisible readiness to catch what's falling, that the real cost begins to show because you start disappearing, piece by piece. You lose the small, unguarded moments that make you feel human, the laughter that isn't careful, the tears that don't need permission, the comfort of not being the one who must always understand. You learn to absorb instead of express, to filter instead of reveal, to say, "I'm okay" so often that it becomes less of a statement and more of a survival mechanism. And in the quiet hours, when no one is asking for anything, you start to wonder if the person you are beneath all that control still exists. Sometimes you catch glimpses, in the way music moves you when you're alone, in the ache of a sunset that feels too beautiful for words, in the sudden urge to cry when someone asks if you're truly happy, because happiness has become something you manage, not something you feel. People will call you strong. They'll admire your calm. They'll tell you they don't know how you do it, how you keep it all together. And you'll smile because there's no graceful way to say that strength has never felt like a choice. The truth is, holding everything together isn't the same as being whole. It's a kind of quiet fracture that masquerades as control. You hold because you fear what will happen if you don't. You hold because letting go feels like admitting defeat. You hold because somewhere along the line, you learned that love is conditional on your composure. But the cost of holding is heavy. It's the missed heartbeat of your own desires. It's the fading of your inner voice beneath the noise of everyone else's needs. It's the loneliness that creeps in even when you're surrounded by people. Especially then. You start to forget that being held is also a human need. That even the strongest architecture needs foundation. That sometimes the collapse isn't destruction, it's release. And the irony is, the more you hold, the more fragile you become. Because nothing that is clenched can truly breathe. Not the body, not the mind, not the heart. Holding on too tightly doesn't preserve things. It suffocates them. And in your quiet effort to save everyone else, you forget to let yourself exist outside the role of savior. If this resonates, stay a while. Not because I have the answers, but because you deserve to be seen in your unraveling, without needing to apologize for it. Sometimes the deepest form of strength is not endurance. It's surrender. The courage to whisper, "I can't do this anymore," and trust that the world won't crumble in response. But before that surrender, there's a reckoning. A slow awareness that what you've been calling control is in truth fear dressed in discipline. That what you've been calling resilience is exhaustion without witness. And that the parts of you that have been quiet the longest are not broken. They're waiting for permission to stop being the caretaker of everyone else's chaos. Waiting for the kind of silence that doesn't feel like emptiness, but rest. waiting for a life that doesn't depend on how well you perform peace. And in that waiting, something sacred begins to stir, a longing to know who you are when you're not holding. A question that hums beneath the fatigue. What if nothing falls apart when you finally let go? It's a question that lingers like smoke in the lungs, slow, heavy, and impossible to exhale all at once. Because for so long, you've built your safety around control. Letting go feels like standing at the edge of a cliff and trusting the air to hold you. But maybe that's the paradox. The things we grip most tightly are often the ones we're meant to release. You see, control was never meant to be a home. It's a shelter, built in the middle of chaos. Necessary, maybe, but temporary. Over time, you start mistaking its walls for your skin. You forget that boundaries can become cages, that strength can calcify into fear, and that peace doesn't bloom where there's no space to breathe. When you spend years holding everything together, your nervous system forgets what safety feels like. Stillness becomes suspicious. Quiet feels dangerous. You brace yourself for disasters that never come, rehearsing rescues in your head, preparing for the moment when the ground finally shifts. But sometimes, nothing's actually wrong. You've just forgotten how to live without tension. It's a strange addiction, this need to be the anchor. Because even when you ache for rest, the silence after release feels unbearable. There's an emptiness that comes when you stop holding, an identity unraveling. Who are you when you're not fixing, soothing, balancing? Who are you when you're not needed? It's easy to confuse purpose with usefulness, to believe your value is measured by how much weight you can carry. But life has a way of showing you, through subtle heartbreaks, quiet losses, and moments of unbearable fatigue, that being everything for everyone will slowly erase you from your own story. And yet, there's something sacred about the breaking point. It's not the end, it's the threshold. Because when you finally stop holding, when your arms fall open from sheer exhaustion, life doesn't punish you. It breathes into the space you've been guarding. It shows you that collapse isn't always failure. Sometimes it's the body's way of saying, enough. Enough pretending, enough surviving, enough performing composure in a world that rarely rewards honesty. And it's in that moment, raw, fragile, unguarded, that you begin to meet yourself again. The self that existed before you became the caretaker. The one who laughed without scanning the room for danger. The one who didn't yet believe that love must be earned through steadiness. But meeting that self is not easy. They live beneath layers of silence and self-control. You'll feel grief when you find them. Not because they're gone, but because you abandoned them for so long in the name of survival. And yet, there's beauty in that grief. It means you're waking up. You start noticing the small rebellions, the way your body sighs when you say no, the relief that comes when you let someone else take the lead, the trembling joy of realizing that the world doesn't end when you stop holding. Sometimes you'll still feel the urge to return, to rebuild the walls, to tighten the grip. That's okay. Healing doesn't erase old instincts. It teaches you to notice them without obeying. You learn to let life breathe through you instead of bracing against it. And in that breath, you begin to sense something you haven't felt in years. Softness. Not weakness, but softness. The quiet confidence of knowing that control and care are not the same. You can love deeply without carrying everything. You can be dependable without being depleted. You can be strong and still rest your head against the world. This realization doesn't come all at once. It arrives in fragments, like morning light through half-drawn curtains. You'll resist it at first, because rest feels foreign when you've spent your life running on vigilance. But the more you let go, the more you see. Nothing is crumbling. Things are simply finding their natural shape. The people who truly love you won't vanish when you stop holding. They'll step forward. They'll hold too. And those who only loved your strength will drift away, revealing the quiet truth. Not everyone deserves access to the version of you that never breaks. This is where the healing deepens, in the quiet, in the not doing. You begin to understand that being needed is not the same as being loved. That sometimes the greatest gift you can give others is the permission to face their own storms. And the greatest gift you can give yourself is rest. But rest is an act of rebellion for those who've lived in survival. It feels unnatural at first, almost selfish. You'll hear the old voices whisper, "You're slipping, you're failing, you're letting things fall apart." But listen closely. Those voices are echoes of a time when love was conditional on performance. They are not truth. The truth is softer. It's the sound of your own heartbeat slowing after years of running. It's the quiet exhale of realizing that life can continue even when you step back. It's the slow, tender unraveling of the idea that you must always be okay. And in that unraveling, a new kind of strength begins to grow. Not the hard, polished kind, but something human, porous, alive. It's the strength to sit in uncertainty without rushing to fix it, to hold space for your pain without needing to translate it into purpose, to be real, even when it's messy, because the truth is, letting go isn't the opposite of control. It's the evolution of it. It's realizing that real control was never about preventing collapse. It was about trusting yourself to rise after it. And as you begin to trust that rhythm, the rise and fall, the holding and releasing, you start to feel something you thought you'd lost long ago. Peace. Not the kind you perform, the kind that doesn't need to be earned. But peace carries its own question, one that will linger as you rest your palms against the weightless air. If you're no longer the one holding everything together, what then holds you? If you're no longer the one holding everything together, what then holds you? It's a question that echoes softly in the hollow spaces left behind when the tension begins to fade. At first, it feels unsettling, that absence of urgency, that quiet where the noise used to be. You find yourself reaching instinctively for the familiar weight of responsibility, the small rituals of control that used to keep the chaos away, but your hands close around nothing, and in that nothing, you start to feel the faint pulse of something you'd forgotten. Life, moving without your supervision. It's strange, isn't it, to realize that the world keeps spinning even when you rest, that people don't dissolve when you stop carrying them. That maybe, all along, it wasn't your grip that kept things whole. It was something larger, quieter, more mysterious. What holds you now is not certainty, but trust. Not perfection, but presence. You begin to sense that there's a rhythm beneath all things, one that doesn't demand control but invites participation. Like waves that don't ask the shore for permission to return. Like breath that enters and leaves the body without your command, and as you begin to move in rhythm with it, you notice something. The spaces that once felt like loss now feel like freedom. The silences that once terrified you now sound like music. Because you are finally listening, not to the chaos around you, but to the quiet intelligence of your own being. There's a gentleness that comes with this awakening. You start treating yourself like someone worth tending to. You rest without apology. You speak without rehearsing. You say no without guilt and yes without calculation. You begin to rebuild your life not as a fortress, but as a garden, something that needs care, not control. It's in this new space that you start to understand what love really means. Not the transactional kind that trades stability for self-sacrifice. Not the fragile version built on your ability to perform strength, but a love that looks you in the eyes, trembling and unfinished, and says, "You don't have to be perfect to be safe here." You realize that love was never supposed to feel like labor. It was meant to be a homecoming, a return to the parts of you that never stopped deserving softness. Because the truth is, no one can love you fully until you stop editing yourself into who they need you to be. And so, you begin to unlearn. You unlearn the reflex to hold. You unlearn the habit of apologizing for your exhaustion. You unlearn the idea that stillness equals failure. And in that unlearning, you start to remember the simple things that once made you feel alive. The smell of rain, the texture of laughter, the peace that comes from doing nothing beautifully. For the first time, you start to see that together doesn't have to mean in control. It can mean integrated, all the fractured pieces of you finally sitting at the same table. The anger, the fear, the tenderness, the longing, all of it seen without judgment. You stop trying to fix yourself and start listening to yourself. And the voice that rises from within doesn't demand, it invites. Be here, it whispers. Be whole, even in your undoing. Because you were never meant to be the glue for everything broken. You were meant to be human, complex, imperfect, and alive. The world doesn't need your control. It needs your authenticity. It doesn't need you to hold it together. It needs you to let it breathe. So you begin to live slower. You take pauses that once felt dangerous. You let emotions pass through instead of locking them away. You laugh without worrying about how it sounds. You cry without explaining why. And the more honest you become, the more life responds. Gently, tenderly, like it was waiting for you to return all along. There's still fear, of course. Old instincts don't die, they fade. Sometimes you'll still wake in the night with that familiar jolt, that sense that you've forgotten something, dropped something, failed someone. But then you'll remember. Nothing has fallen apart. You've simply fallen back into yourself. This is what freedom feels like. Not the absence of responsibility, but the presence of balance. You still care. You still give. But now, you also receive. You let others hold you, not because you are weak, but because you finally understand that strength is meant to flow both ways. And in the quiet moments when doubt creeps in, when the world feels uncertain, when old wounds whisper their familiar lies, you'll touch the center of your chest and remember the truth. You don't need to hold everything together. You only need to hold on to what's real. What's real is the breath moving through you. What's real is the softness returning to your voice. What's real is the small, steady heartbeat that's been with you since the beginning, asking only for your attention. Everything else, the expectations, the performance, the constant reaching, were just layers you wore to feel safe. But safety isn't found in the grip. It's found in the trust that even if things fall apart, you will not. Because you've learned that you are not the container, you are the current. You are not the one holding life. You are life, unfolding. And the more you allow it to move, the more it begins to carry you toward peace, toward authenticity, toward the quiet kind of joy that doesn't need to be managed. One day you'll look back and realize, nothing truly broke when you stopped holding. It only began to breathe differently, and you, the one who thought the world depended on your endurance, will finally exhale. You'll stand in the middle of your unguarded life and whisper, maybe to no one at all, I didn't fall apart. I simply stopped pretending I was whole, and in that moment, you'll understand the hidden cost of trying to hold everything together, not as a tragedy, but as a transformation. Because the real loss was never in letting go. It was in all the years you forgot that being alive was never meant to be so heavy. And as you let the last of that weight slip from your hands, you'll feel it. The quiet truth rising through your chest like dawn breaking over water. You were never meant to hold the world. You were meant to feel it move through you. There are moments after awakening when silence feels like a language all its own. You find yourself standing at the edge of a life that feels both familiar and foreign. A life that no longer demands to be managed, only met. And for the first time, you don't rush to fill the quiet. You let it speak. Because after years of holding everything together, you begin to realize something both beautiful and terrifying. Peace has a weight too. Not the kind that crushes, but the kind that grounds. It anchors you to the present in a way control never could. It asks nothing from you. No performance, no precision, only honesty. You start to notice how your senses wake up in its presence. The air feels thicker, fuller. Colors seem to hum instead of shout. The smallest things, a cup of tea cooling beside you, a shadow moving across the wall, begin to feel sacred, because when you stop gripping life so tightly, you start to feel it again. But peace, real peace, isn't always gentle. Sometimes it confronts you with everything you avoided in your pursuit of control. The emotions you labeled as weakness, the memories you kept busy enough to forget, the quiet truth that you built your identity around other people's comfort. Now, with your hands finally empty, there's nowhere left to hide. And at first, it's uncomfortable, almost unbearable. Because to live openly means to feel without armor, to love without the guarantee of being loved back, to trust that even if your heart breaks, it breaks in service of becoming more whole. You start to understand that holding everything together was never really about strength. It was about fear. Fear that if you stopped controlling, everything would dissolve. But fear only lives in the absence of trust, and trust is beginning to bloom now, quietly, like a small green stem pushing through the cracks of an old habit. Trust in yourself. Trust in time. Trust in the strange, merciful intelligence of things falling apart so that something truer can take shape. There's a shift that happens when you no longer measure your worth by your usefulness. You start to show up differently, slower, softer, more deliberate. You stop rushing to fix and start learning to witness. You begin to realize that being present is not a small act. It's a sacred rebellion against everything that taught you to rush, to prove, to perfect. And in that rebellion, you find something like forgiveness. Not for others, not yet, but for yourself. For all the times you silenced your own needs to keep someone else from leaving. For every smile you wore like armor. For every time you mistook exhaustion for purpose. You forgive the version of you who didn't know another way, because how could they? They were just trying to keep the world from breaking. They were just trying to be loved. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, compassion takes root. You begin to look at your reflection with eyes that don't demand improvement. You start to speak to yourself the way you've always spoken to others, with gentleness, with patience, with understanding. It's disorienting at first, to receive from yourself what you've spent a lifetime giving away, but it feels right, it feels overdue. You realize now that your old life wasn't built on love. It was built on obligation, on fear of losing control, losing connection, losing worth. And this new life, this unguarded one, is built on truth. Not the kind you can explain, but the kind you can only feel. Deep, resonant, wordless. You begin to see the beauty in letting things and people be what they are. You stop editing moments to make them easier. You stop carrying conversations that have already ended. You stop trying to hold love in place, because the moment you stop gripping it, love begins to move freely again. Sometimes toward you, sometimes away, always honest. And one night, as you lie awake in the soft dark, you'll realize that the peace you searched for was never out there. It was waiting beneath your own tension. It was always you, longing to be met without demand. You'll feel tears rise, not from sadness, but recognition. The kind of tears that say, I remember who I am now. You'll realize that holding everything together was never your purpose. Your purpose was to learn how to live open, how to let things breathe, how to trust impermanence, how to love without needing to possess, to hold less and feel more, to break beautifully and heal honestly, because in the end, the cost of holding everything together was never the exhaustion, it was the distance, the space between who you were and who you pretended to be. And now that distance has closed. You are here, fully, fragile, whole, free. The world will still ask you to hurry. People will still try to hand you their chaos. The old reflex will whisper, pick it up, carry it, hold it. But this time, you'll pause, you'll take a breath, and you'll remember, not everything needs to be held. Some things only need to be witnessed. And maybe that's what it means to finally live, to let life move as it wants, to trust that nothing real is lost in the letting go, and to know, in your bones, that the softest thing you can be is still enough to hold the universe.